Jennifer Crowe, welcome to KTNV to talk about this very important issue. As you know, we had Robert Einthoven, who is the spokesman for the Nevadans for Freedom. So I'll ask you the same question I asked you earlier before we get on air. Why are you guys against freedom?
Well, first of all, thanks, John, for having me in today to talk about question one. And we are for freedom. Nevadans for Background Checks is all about freedom. We support the Second Amendment very strongly. We have a number of gun owners and other folks on our coalitions who believe strongly in the Second Amendment. But we also know that with those rights come responsibilities. And we have a responsibility as a community, as a state, to do what we can to make sure that guns don't end up in the hands of criminals and other dangerous people who are prohibited under our existing laws from having them. And that's what question one does.
But I guess it doesn't really, because it sounds like you're over-promising. Make sure guns don't end up in the hands of criminals. And Robert Einthoven and others would say, and common sense would tell people, if a criminal wants to get a gun, doing what this question would do, which would just, and I mentioned this before, I don't think it does that much more than what common sense says. That's what you say, right? Which is these private transactions with some exemptions, family to family, et cetera, that they have to go through a background check, probably through a licensed firearms dealer. But if I'm a criminal and I want to get a gun, I'm still going to get a gun, am I not?
Okay, well, first let's talk about how the system currently works. If you go to buy a gun now from a licensed gun dealer at a gun store, you go through a background check. That's been the law for over 20 years. However, if you go to a gun show and you go to an unlicensed seller at a gun show, or you connect with somebody online on one of these gun marketplace websites, no background check is required for that sale. And those private sales account for about 40% of the gun sale market at this point. So that's a substantial number of guns that are being sold without background checks as required by the existing law. So all question one does is close that loophole so that when you go to a private seller or you meet with somebody online, a stranger online, to buy a gun, that a background check is conducted the same way it would be at a gun store. This is about leveling the playing field and making sure that the same standards are applied across the board.
But even if that makes sense, which I think a lot of people do, and polling shows that it does to most people viscerally. Our poll here at KTNV, I think, showed 2/3. There have been polls that showed even greater support for common sense background checks, as you would call them. I mean, your website is called Safe Nevada. You said it will keep guns out of the hands of criminals. Again, you're selling something that may make sense at a common sense level. Why are you overselling it?
I don't think we are overselling. No one law can stop every crime or prevent every tragedy. And we're not promising that this will stop every gun violence crime. That's not possible. But what we do know is that in states that have closed the loophole and have a similar law to what we're trying to get passed here in Nevada, and there's 18 other states that have done this, they've seen significant reductions in gun violence. 48% fewer police officers killed with guns. 48% fewer gun suicides. Suicide is a huge issue in our state. This could make a real difference. 46% fewer women shot and killed by their partners. We've had a number of, unfortunately, high-profile domestic violence incidences so far this year, and there have been instances where abusers have been able to get guns and they've shot their partners, wounded their children with guns that they never should have had in the first place. And if we can close the loophole, it will make it that much harder for dangerous people, criminals, fugitives to get guns. It's not going to stop every crime, but it will make a huge difference in curbing
I want to talk about domestic violence. You brought that up, and you had an event here in Las Vegas.
Yes, we did.
On Wednesday. But you keep referring to closing the loophole. Isn't this really a problem of some current laws not being enforced? You're not just closing a loophole. You're adding a new layer of background checks that just don't exist now.
I would disagree with that. Background checks have been the law for a long time. That's been the case. And most people assume that all gun sales already go through background checks.
But they may assume that. It's not the law, though.
But they don't realize that there's this hole. And I think when people realize that there's this loophole and there's this hole where people can avoid background checks and get guns that they're not supposed to have by going to these private sellers at a gun show where they have a sign that says no background check required. Whereas you can go down 3 booths down the line at the gun show and there's a licensed gun dealer who can sell you the same gun, but he has to conduct the background check. It should be the same at both. If we're selling the gun, there should be a background check.
But I guess what I'm saying, let's talk about domestic violence, which I think people agree is a huge problem in this country and in this state. Most domestic violence, people who are perpetrators are not criminals before they do that. they could probably pass a background check, even under this law, still get a gun, still kill their spouse. Why do you think this is going to prevent the domestic violence deaths?
Well, that's not necessarily true, that they don't have a record. There's a
Most
number
don't.
of cases where people have
course
a record,
there's-
or if there's a temporary restraining order, you're not allowed to have a gun either.
Right.
So there are other things, but with domestic violence, what we do know is that Nevada has the 5th highest rate of domestic violence in the country. Women here are 65% more likely to be shot and killed than in other states. That's unacceptable.
By spouses who would generally pass a background check under this law.
Not
Generally.
necessarily.
Not necessarily, but that's the minority. And I guess that's the crux of the NRA's argument, right? Is that and they always use the phrase law-abiding citizens, is that you want to pass this blanket law and go after law-abiding citizens with these onerous regulations, expensive, they have to go through this background check. Now, I think the expensive argument is a non-starter.
There is no expense. There's a fee right now.
It's a nominal fee. It's not that big a deal. But the real argument, and you and I both know this, has nothing to do with your law, in my opinion. It has to do with this nose under the tent, that here you come, the next step is this, till you get to a national gun registry. That's what they think Michael Bloomberg, who has helped fund the group that supports this initiative, really wants. Is that true?
No, it's not true. And we hear a lot of misinformation and false facts put out by the opposition, and this is one of them.
Your only true facts here today?
I'm all about true facts,
all right.
truth and justice, right
Okay.
here, John. Yeah. Our group is called Nevadans for Background Checks, and that's for a reason. That's what we're working to do. This isn't about a gun registry or some infringement on Second Amendment rights. We
Not this
support
time.
the
Maybe
Second
next time.
But we're focused on what we're doing right now. Question 1 is what we're facing right now. It's on the ballot in 90 days, and we need voters to support it because it will make our state safer. It will save lives. And if we can save just one life, why wouldn't we want to do that?
Well, I mean, but that argument doesn't hold water, really. If you can just save one life, you can make that argument for all kinds of laws that I could propose to you that you would think are ridiculous. You can't think this would just save one life.
No, we know it's going to save more, but if we can only save one, why wouldn't we want to do that? Why wouldn't we want to close the loophole and apply the same standard to these private sales that already exist for these licensed gun dealers? Why wouldn't we want to have a level playing field? Why wouldn't we want to do all of those things that we know? The research shows, and this is something that the opposition just continues to ignore. The numbers are out there. The statistics are true. We can cut gun violence by significant amounts, particularly in these areas that I've mentioned: domestic violence, suicide, gun trafficking, which is a huge problem in terms of crime on the streets.
Mr. Einthoven brought up a couple of examples of what he said would be criminalized, the kind of behavior that would be criminalized under question 1. Hunters are out, and they're using this a lot because it's a big hunting state, and so a couple of hunters are out, and one guy's gun breaks, and he uses the other guy's gun. Supposedly, a sheriff could be hiding behind a tree and come arrest him for that. My buddy is going on vacation to Europe for a couple of weeks, gives me his gun to store it. That kind of behavior would be criminalized. What's your answer to that?
Well, my answer to that is that the opposition is really trying to muddy the waters here. And
would those be
confuse
crimes under
people.
question 1?
No, they wouldn't. If we go out hunting together, John, and your gun breaks and I loan you mine, there's no background check required on that. That's perfectly acceptable. There's the onerous regulations that the opposition keeps talking about are really just a lot of scare tactics to make people concerned about this nose under the tent argument that you raise. It diverts the issue and really, I think, is distracting from the fact that there is this hole in the law, that there is this double standard, that there is this way for criminals to get around laws and get their hands on guns that they're not supposed to have. And we should be, when we can do something about that, we should do something about that.
As you well know, you and I have been around way longer than either of us want to acknowledge in the public political world here. That the whole ethos of Nevada. Why would you try to do this in Nevada? We're a libertarian state. Live and let live. We're the last frontier of the Wild West. This is a tough sell, isn't it, for the argument you're making?
I don't think it's a tough sell, and we see that with the polling. Your own poll showed over 2/3 support, and that's very consistent with what we've seen.
Might as well not run a campaign then if so many people
Well, you have
want
to run a campaign. We have to educate people. It is down on the ballot. There's a lot of distraction at the top of the ballot, and we want to make sure
Distractions like a presidential race.
Something like that. You know, that thing that'll turn people out to vote. We want to make sure that folks understand that question 1 is on the ballot, what it does and what it doesn't do, and to make sure that they turn out to vote. That's why we're running such a grassroots fundamental campaign that we've been doing from the beginning of the year. We have hundreds of volunteers who have put in thousands of hours. We've had almost 100 house parties all across the state. We've been collecting commit cards since the caucuses at the beginning of the year, educating voters, reaching out to them and explaining to them what this simple proposal does and what a big impact it will make.
I remember a couple sessions ago when a background check bill was before the legislature, and people walked around with 86%. That was theoretically the number of people that supported it. That bill passed the legislature, then was vetoed by the governor, who mentioned a couple of things he thought should have been in there, including exemption for family-to-family transfers. Nevadans for background checks addressed some of the things in the governor's veto message, and yet this week I reported that the governor is going to oppose this question. Did you think you could get the governor's support? Were you hopeful? Was that a big blow to you?
Well, it's disappointing that the governor is siding with the gun lobby instead of the overwhelming majority of Nevadans who support background checks because they know it's common sense. So that is unfortunate, but I think voters are smart. They see through the politics of this and understand that it's really about public safety. This isn't a partisan issue. We have Democrats, Republicans, independents, veterans, gun owners on our coalition
What
of
Republican
support.
elected officials in Nevada do you have on your team?
Well, we have former Assemblyman Scott Sibley, who's one of our supporters.
But no Republican elected official is going to get behind this, are they?
Well, the politics of this may be difficult for people who are looking at votes and winning re-election, but what we're looking at is sound public policy, and the research shows that this makes a difference. And I think that voters are smart enough to see through, to see these political calculations for what they are, and to vote for what they know will make their state safer.
You know, Mr. Einthoven brought up, and there's been media on this, that almost all the sheriffs, elected sheriffs in the state, are against question one. Joe Lombardo, who was the Clark County sheriff, I think maybe the only one who's neutral on it. Is that a problem for you that all these, I mean, these are the these are the ones who are out there on the streets, and they're saying this is not going to help. Even had the undersheriff in Las Vegas and Clark County say this isn't essentially going to stop the gun crimes. That's got to be a problem for you.
Well, question one has the support of thousands of police officers across the state. We've earned the endorsement of the Nevada Association of Public Safety Officers. They have over 1,500 police officers they represent in all 17 counties all across the state, rural and urban.
But not the sheriffs.
We also have the support of the Las Vegas Fraternal Order of Police, another 300 members.
So you got the unions. You got the unions.
No, we have officers who are working on the street facing gun crimes every day who see the effects of gun violence and know that this loophole is causing problems.
Are you saying that the sheriffs don't see the effects? The sheriffs theoretically have more knowledge than any of these single police officers, do they not, theoretically?
These are politicians. That's a different calculation. This is about public safety. This is not a political issue, which is why we have such broad bipartisan support.
Well, we have, unfortunately, it is a political issue, right? Like all of these public policy issues are. And the issue of getting your message out is significant. Robert Einthoven from the NRA was essentially poor-mouthing as if they're up against this, behemoth, every town, and Mayor Bloomberg, the bottomless pit of money, as if the NRA is about to file bankruptcy or something. How much money are you willing to spend? Is it $5 million, $10 million? How much are you willing to spend?
We're running a campaign to win. That's been our intention from the beginning, which is why we've been on the ground, grassroots organizing since late last year. We intend to win. We will have the resources to win. And
$5 million? $5 million more? You've already bought about $5 million in TV time, right? And so think about that. I mean, you're going to have to spend that much money for something that you say is common sense, that 70, 80% of the people may support. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that this is a very busy political year where there's going to be a lot of attention paid to top of the ticket races. The presidential race, our hotly contested Senate race, and some of these other congressional races are really going to be sucking up a lot of air in the room and a lot of the television time. So we really wanted to make sure that we got in early and reserved some time so that we could get our message out when it came time to get people out to vote this fall.
You know, they keep talking about, and the NRA loves to use Michael Bloomberg, who has been a big supporter of this, out of state, back east interests trying to impose this on us poor Nevadans. What do you say to that?
Every town is one of our partners and donors, but we have many partners and donors.
They're the biggest by far, though.
But we have significant support within the state as well from the gaming community in particular. MGM, Caesars, Wynn Resorts have all given significant contributions, not just corporate, but executives have given personal money as well.
And I believe Jan Jones from Caesars is actually a big spokesman for the cause.
Jan Jones is co-chair of our advisory board along with Elaine Wynn, and our advisory board is made up of over 50 people from across the state, community leaders, business leaders, faith, veterans, law enforcement, high-profile folks who you have never probably in all your years in covering politics seen on the same side of an issue. in this divided year when so many people are picking sides and the rhetoric is so high, this is one area where a lot of people can agree on. This is something we can come together on. A majority of Nevadans support this because they know it will save lives and they know it's common sense.
All right, it's just the beginning. Unfortunately, still 90 days or so left. I really appreciate your willingness to come on the program and talk about it. Thanks.
Thanks for having me today, John.
All right.